All right, folks, we'll get started with Chapter 10 here, Democracy in America. And there we've got an image to get us started. And here's the preview. We've got 6 sections. We'll take them each one by one, and we'll go from there, starting with this focus question. One basis of political democracy in this period was the challenge to property qualifications for voting. It began in the American Revolution but culminated in the early 19th century. After the Revolution, no new state required property ownership to vote, and in older states, constitutional conventions in the 1820s and 30s abolished property qualifications, partly because a growing number of wage earners who did not own much property demanded the vote. In the South, however, where large slave owners dominated politics and distrusted mass democracy, property requirements were eliminated only gradually and disappeared quite late, by 1860. The personal independence required of the citizen was henceforth located not in owning property, but in owning oneself, a reflection of this period's individualism. The single exception to this democratizing trend was Rhode Island, which required voters to own considerable real estate or pay a certain amount of rent. The state was a center of factory production, and many wage earners could not vote. In 1841, reformers met at a people's convention and drafted a new state constitution that gave the vote to all adult men and stripped it from blacks. When the convention extra-legally ratified the Constitution and inaugurated Thomas Dorr, a lawyer, as governor, President John Tyler dispatched federal troops to the state, and the movement collapsed. By 1840, more than 90% of adult white men could vote. By then, America had a vibrant democratic system that engaged massive numbers of citizens. Lacking traditional bases of nationality such as ethnic or religious unity, democratic political institutions imparted a sense of identity to Americans. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French writer who visited the United States in the early 1830s, wrote of this political culture in his classic book, Democracy in America. As an aristocrat, Tocqueville disliked democracy, but his key insight was that democracy was more than just voting or political institutions. Democracy, to Tocqueville, was a culture that encouraged individual initiative, belief in equality, and a public sphere with numerous voluntary organizations that wanted to improve society. Democracy was new. The idea that sovereignty resided in the mass of ordinary citizens was a departure in Western thought, which traditionally had viewed democracy as the road to anarchy. But in the United States, pressure from those originally excluded from political participation created a democracy for white men that triumphed in the age of Jackson. In America, the right to vote and participation in politics offered a sense of national identity. While democracy reinforced the sense of equality among those who belonged to the political nation, it deepened the divide separating them from those who did not. The market revolution in political democracy expanded the public sphere and the world of print. This information revolution was facilitated in part by the invention of the steam-powered printing press, which printed much more matter at far less cost. A new style of sensational journalism catered to a mass readership, which was soon created in newspapers with a total circulation higher than that of all of Europe. Low postal rates and the growth of political parties also sparked the expansion of print and allowed newspapers to reach audiences far beyond their own locality. Labor organizations, reformers, and even Native American tribes printed their own alternative newspapers for the first time in American history. And the growth of print offered a new generation of women writers a venue for expression. As democratization expanded the number of people who participated in politics, it was necessary to define the boundaries of the political nation in terms of freedom and who could enjoy it. Antebellum American political life was both expansive and exclusive. Democracy absorbed native-born white men and white immigrants, but established barriers to the participation of women and non-white men. As democracy triumphed, the grounds for political exclusion shifted from economic dependency to supposed natural incapacity. Gender and racial differences were seen as part of a single natural hierarchy of innate endowments. A natural bounty was not at all exclusive, many argued, and women and non-whites were deemed lacking in qualities necessary for democracy and self-government. While freedom for white men involved a process of personal transformation, of developing their potential to the fullest extent, democracy's limits rested on the idea that the character and abilities of non-whites and women were fixed by nature. Moreover, the world of politics was partly defined against the feminine sphere of the home. Freedom in the public sphere in no way required freedom in the private sphere. In a nation obsessed with equality, democracy was more and more associated with whiteness. While white Americans of all social classes dressed similarly and mixed in public, blacks were increasingly excluded from public life. Racist depictions of blacks in the culture became widespread. An ideology of racial superiority and inferiority with an alleged scientific basis took root where it had never before existed. After 1800, every state admitted to the Union except Maine limited voting rights to white males. By 1860, blacks could vote on the same basis as whites in only 5 New England states, which had only 4% of the nation's free black population. Whites of the Revolutionary era had considered blacks as potential members of the body politic, but in the 19th century, membership in the political nation was increasingly demarcated by race. No blacks had full equality before the law, and they were barred from schools, militias, and other public institutions. In effect, race replaced class as the boundary between American men with political freedom and those without, a process that incorporated many white immigrants into American democracy. So that's our first question. We'll see you next time for the second.